Bringing the discussion into the studio, strikes from an Iranian airbase are showing Russia's expanding footprint in the Middle East. However, question does rise regarding this new alliance, tightening alliance between Iran and Russia. Why are there strengthening ties now, Paula?
I don't know if it's that much of a surprise. You just need to look at what the U.S. State Department said, and they said, to quote, "It's unfortunate, but to be expected." We are seeing the rearranging of alliances on the ground, particularly in Syria. And here you have, as you mentioned, the Russians, the Iranians, the Syrians. There is close ties between Russia and Iran in the sense that both are involved on the ground. Both, from the beginning, have been supporting the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Iran has had the Revolutionary Guard there. Iran has been helping Hezbollah from Lebanon. So it makes sense that they're actually on the same side of the conflict. I want to make the point, though, that it doesn't actually change anything in real terms in terms of the fighting. Russia has been using long-range bombers since the beginning of its aerial campaign in Syria. The only difference now, as we saw in that report, is that the bombers are able to reduce their flight time by 60%, and they will be able to carry heavier loads. Having said that, though, certainly we have these alliances happening. We have Turkey and the closening of ties there. We have China coming to the party. So it is an interesting Middle East that will see Russia play a greater role.
But I still do want to emphasize on Iran and Russia. They've had a history of disputes. They're more frenemies than friends. Ali, what's your take?
Well, I think that what we saw yesterday completed a serial of events that took place, political events that took place in the last couple of days. One, a couple of days ago, Deputy Foreign Russian Minister said that Russia is blessing the new political Supreme Council in Yemen, which was established in parallel to the collapse of the talks between the Houthis and the government in Kuwait. This is one thing. The second thing is we saw the rapprochement between Turkey and Russia, and we need to mention that Turkey was very silent yesterday when we saw this strike coming from Iran and hitting not only al-Nusra Front and ISIS, but also other moderate, so-called moderate rebels on the ground in Syria. And of course what happened yesterday, and the fact that the Russians are trying to finish this battle of Aleppo in the coming weeks. Everybody in the region are receiving signs and messages from the Russians that by next month the fight over Aleppo will be finished. As Paula mentioned, the Chinese joined the party, the very sad party around Aleppo, and we saw that the Saudis are trying to react. They are saying that they are not going to produce more oil in order to allow they are going to produce more oil in order to lower the price of oil as one instrument to put pressure over Russia. So as Paula said, we are seeing a reshuffle in the alliances in the region, but there is one main stable thing. The Americans are very absent, and the Russians are gaining more and more ground, both on the ground but also on the political sphere.
And using it as Iran as a leverage tool for or vis-a-vis the U.S. Now, I am wondering, and looking at Israel and all of this, Israel fears this alliance, the closening of relations between Iran and Russia, developing their nuclear reactor, providing them with S-300 systems. Do you believe Israel has reason to have these concerns?
Yes and no. Yes, because of course Israel has a long-term problem with Iran, so it's not going to do any favors to Israel that there's this closening of ties between Russia and Iran. And just to follow on from what you were saying, there have been meetings between the sides. Putin was in Iran in November, so this is something that we have seen happening for quite some time. Having said that, though, as Ali mentioned and I said earlier, there is this reshifting in the region. If we look at Turkey, for example, there's a closing of ties between Israel and Turkey. There's a closening of ties between Russia and Turkey. So in that respect, Israel doesn't need to be that worried, because there is this reshuffling and everybody is coming, or at least to some extent, Israel's friends are moving more onto the same page. Not that there would ever necessarily be a closening of ties between Israel and Iran, but Turkey's part of the same party. Turkey and Iran are moving closer together and have been close together. So I think to that respect, Israel doesn't need to be overly concerned, but of course it's going to wonder and worry about the developments.
And also one must wonder how it's going to affect the so-called talks talks between Washington and Russia, which say an agreement is nearing. Ali, briefly, your reaction?
Well, I think that there is a de facto understanding, at least from the American side, that the Russians are the main people in Syria. When we are 2-3 months before the elections in the United States, there are not much to do from the perspective of a president that built his career on not intervening on external affair, mainly in very complicated affair like Syria. And to complete what you said about Israel, yes, Israel should be worried from the fact that the moderate Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, is getting weakened by the reshuffle. We talked about the new alliances in the region, because everything is directed against Saudi Arabia and the Sunnite countries, both on Yemen, when the Iranian publicly said that we are supplying the Houthis with ballistic missiles that are striking Saudi Arabia, and the Russians are saying we are blessing the new council in Yemen. And when we know that the Russians are trying to split between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia is getting weakened in the last weeks, and saying so, I think that yes, from this point, from this angle, Israel can be worried.
For concern, although everyone in the grand or greater picture